Hudson Howie, nicknamed Doc, was born in Ballarat, Victoria, Australia in 1875, the second son of Robert Howie, known as Ballarat Bob, a Scottish immigrant and noted horse trainer of the time. All four of Bob's sons were involved in the horse racing industry, two as jockeys and two as trainers. In 1893, Hudson obtained a Victorian jockey's licence, beginning a brief and not entirely happy career in horse racing. The highlight of his career was winning the Great Eastern Steeplechase, riding Eclipse in 1897. This jumps race, begun in 1876 and still run today, despite concern in some quarters for the safety of the horses, then and now was a major Easter event in the Adelaide Hills, drawing massive crowds to watch. Hudson was usually not as fortunate as that day. In 7 years he had 21 falls, resulting in the deaths of 7 horses. In 1898, a fall he sustained caused him to be unconscious for 2 weeks. Again in 1900, he fell at Cheltenham Racecourse. It was following this 1900 fall that Hudson's behaviour was said to have become erratic. Yet he continued riding, and in September 1904, at Moonee Ponds, Melbourne, he was riding Iron Duke when the horse fell and was killed. Hudson was again concussed, his face and head badly cut and bruised, and one of his thighs severely lacerated. Hudson married Nellie Biddle in 1900 in Victoria. They had 4 children, their second son dying as an infant in 1903, and their first son would die at the age of 13 of heart disease. Their first daughter was born in 1903, and their second in 1906. Ballarat Bob had rented stables at the disused Somerton Horse Tram stables, but 2 years earlier had moved to a property next to his son Charles at St Leonard's, Glenelg. Hudson moved with his family to nearby Mary Street. In November 1905, Hudson had just returned from a trip to India. Bob Howie's housekeeper was a 40-year-old woman named Bella Wortley. Born Isabella Reed, she had married George Wortley in 1886 and had at least 3 children. George was living apart from her, somewhere in the north of South Australia. On the 17th of November 1905, Hudson was spoken to harshly by his father at about 6:30 in the morning regarding a horse which Hudson had not attended to properly. At about 10 o'clock, Hudson visited his brother Charles' nearby residence, aware that his brother was not at home. Speaking to his sister-in-law Ella, he asked to borrow his brother's shotgun. Despite telling Hudson that if anything happened, he would have to be responsible for the consequences, she nevertheless loaned him the gun. He started to load the gun in the kitchen until Ella told him she was uncomfortable with having it loaded in the house. The stable boy, Percy Bartlett, was also present and agreed with her. Without argument, Hudson began to remove the shells. Having helped Hudson remove the shells, Percy then took the gun and went outside with it, followed by Hudson. He then handed the gun to Hudson, who asked him for a cigarette. Then Hudson left, remarking that he was going to the sandhills adjacent to the property to shoot rabbits. William Clark, another stable boy, spoke to Howie on the sandhills at about 10:45 a.m, asking him what he was doing. Hudson replied that he was looking for rabbits, something Clark had not known Hudson to do before. Percy Bartlett saw Hudson on the sandhills about 5 minutes later. But a little while after that, at 11 a.m, Howie was seen in the stables cleaning the gun. A third stable boy named Roach spoke to him, but received no reply. Also at about 11 a.m, George Francis Wortley, the 16-year-old son of Isabella, saw Howie in the kitchen of the Howie house with the gun loaded. Hudson told him it was his own gun. After that, Hudson walked away, but a half hour later George was chopping wood when he noticed Hudson was back, but took little notice. Hudson was talking to Isabella on the veranda of the house, but what was said wasn't loud enough to be overheard. By chance George looked up and saw Howie half raise the gun to his shoulder and fire. Isabella fell to the floor, and Hudson calmly walked away. George started to chase after him, but the gun was turned towards the boy, causing him to break off the pursuit, and instead run to the stables, where he alerted Roach and Clark to the shooting, asking one of them to run for the police. Meanwhile, Hudson had gone straight to his brother's house. Charles was now home, and was handed the gun and unused cartridges by his brother. Charles angrily told him that he had no right to come and get the gun while he, Charles, was away. Upon asking if he had shot anything, Hudson answered, "One rabbit," and then he walked away. Dr. O'Leary had been called, and arrived soon after, and found Isabella lying curled unconscious where she had fallen. The blast of the gun had shot away her right cheek and shattered both of her jaws. She never recovered consciousness, but lingered for about 9 hours, until dying at 8:30 p.m. After leaving his brother's residence, Hudson was making his way to the Glenelg police station when he met Constable Lucas going to the stables. "I'm coming to see you," he said. "I've had trouble. I have shot the wife." Constable Lucas asked, "Your wife?" "No, my father's wife." Escorting him to the station a little further on, they encountered an agitated Bob Howie, who approached asking his son, "What have you done?" "I done it." "Why didn't you shoot me instead of her?" Hudson replied, "I did it for your sake." Hudson was taken to the police station, while Lucas returned to the stables to join Constable Fitzgerald. At the stables, Isabella had been placed on a stretcher and taken inside. Lucas returned to the police station and formally arrested Hudson. At the inquest into the death the following Monday morning, 20th of November 1905, at the Glenelg Town Hall, Hudson was committed for trial on a charge of wilful murder, the trial taking place in December. On the same day as the inquest, Mrs. Wortley's body was removed from the Howie residence and taken to Brighton North Cemetery for burial. On the 14th of December 1905, the jury found Hudson guilty, but that the act took place during a period of temporary insanity, and he was sentenced to be held at the Adelaide jail until the governor's pleasure was known. Governor's pleasure is a legal term meaning that a person who was found insane could be held in detention for an indefinite length of time. In Hudson's case, it was not for very long. By May of 1907, he was already a free man, just 18 months after Isabella Wortley's death. While hunting near Melbourne, he yet again fell from his mount and suffered some injuries. In December 1910, Bob Howie died at the age of 68 in Adelaide. On June the 25th, 1911, Howie, who had been living with his brother Steve in Melbourne for 3 months, bid his brother good night, but instead of going to bed, he quietly left the house and wandered down to the nearby train line. Between Ormond and Glenhuntly stations, he lay down on the tracks and waited. When his body was found the next morning, he had been decapitated by a train. Hopefully, Hudson Doc Howie, in passing at the age of 35, had finally found in death the peace which had eluded him in his troubled years of life in the dark corners of history.